April 14, 1994, high above the rugged terrain of northern Iraq, where the air is thin and tense with the residue of war, two US Air Force F-15 fighter jets cut through the sky. It's a routine patrol, part of Operation Provide Comfort, the mission aimed at protecting Kurdish civilians and enforcing a no-fly zone in the aftermath of the Gulf War. These jets are some of the most advanced war machines in the world, flown by highly trained pilots tasked with maintaining peace and security in this volatile region. Down below, two US Army UH-60 Black Hawk helicopters make their way through the valleys. Inside, a diverse group of people is traveling: diplomats, Kurdish officials, peacekeepers, and humanitarian workers. These helicopters are clearly marked with American flags, 26 in total between the two of them. The stars and stripes are meant to signal safety, unity, and shared purpose. But in the next few minutes, those flags will be meaningless. A deadly misunderstanding unfolds. Despite being allies under the same command structure, communication breaks down. The fighter pilots are informed that there may be hostile helicopters in the area, possibly Iraqi Mi-24 Hinds. Spotting the Black Hawks, they mistake them for the enemy. AWACS radar operators and ground command fail to intervene in time. The pilots receive no firm confirmation but are cleared to engage. In a matter of moments, the F-15s unleash missiles. Both Black Hawks are obliterated mid-air. All 26 people aboard are killed: American service members, foreign diplomats, and humanitarian workers. Not a single soul survives. What should have been a day of routine coordination turns into one of the most devastating friendly fire incidents in US military history. The aftermath is filled with grief, shock, and hard questions. How could such a catastrophic error happen in a tightly controlled, high-tech military operation? Investigations follow. Blame shifts. Careers end. But for the families of the victims, nothing can undo what was done in those 5 minutes. And those 26 flags, they remain a tragic symbol, not of patriotism or protection, but of a fatal lapse in identification, communication, and oversight. A symbol of how war, even in its quieter moments, remains inherently dangerous, not just from enemies, but sometimes from within. The mission 3 years earlier, after the Gulf War ended, Iraq turned its wrath inward against its own Kurdish population in the north. The US and its allies responded with Operation Provide Comfort, a humanitarian and military mission. It began with food drops and medical relief, but quickly evolved into a protective shield, a no-fly zone north of the 36th parallel, enforced by US and coalition aircraft. By 1994, American jets, helicopters, and surveillance planes flew these skies daily. Tens of thousands of missions had launched from bases in Turkey and the Persian Gulf. Not a single aircraft had been seriously threatened. The airspace was dubbed sanitized. Pilots joked it was safer than training runs in Nevada. But safety breeds complacency. And in war, complacency is a quiet killer. Behind the scenes, cracks were forming. Protocols were loosening. Identifications weren't being triple-checked. Communication between branches, US Air Force, Army, Navy, had become routine, casual, sometimes sloppy. Different forces rotated in and out of the mission, each relying on the assumption that someone else had double-checked the airspace. Then came the morning of April 14th, 1994. 2 US F-15 fighter jets were patrolling the no-fly zone, armed and scanning for potential threats, particularly Iraqi aircraft that might violate the airspace. At the same time, a routine US Army mission was underway. 2 Black Hawk helicopters ferrying personnel across northern Iraq. There were no warnings, no hostile radar locks, just a sudden, brutal mistake. The F-15s locked onto the Black Hawks and, mistaking them for enemy helicopters, fired. In an instant, both Black Hawks were destroyed. All 26 people on board were killed, including military personnel, civilians, and allies. It was one of the most tragic episodes of friendly fire in US military history. How did this happen in a safe sky? The answer: A perfect storm of miscommunication, overconfidence, and systemic failure. The aircraft were flying in a known corridor, but their presence hadn't been properly relayed. Identification. Friend or foe, IFF, systems failed or were misread. Ground controllers didn't catch the error in time, and the pilots, trained to respond swiftly to potential threats, made a split-second call based on incomplete information. The skies had grown too quiet, and in that silence, vigilance slipped. In the aftermath, investigations revealed layer upon layer of oversight failure. Recommendations were made, systems were overhauled. But for the families of the victims, the question still hung in the air: how could this have happened? Under our own flag, in our own skies, systems slipping, a prelude to disaster. By the spring of 1994, the once cohesive machinery of US military aviation was beginning to show dangerous cracks. AWACS aircraft, flying high at 32,000 feet, remained the eyes of the sky, orchestrating movements of coalition forces with sweeping radar capabilities. But beneath this high-tech coordination, the system was quietly failing. Army helicopters, vital to ground operations, were increasingly isolated in the skies. Their flight plans often weren't integrated with those of Air Force controllers. Communication faltered. Radios were incompatible, encryption varied, and identification friend or foe, IFF, systems were frequently outdated or incorrect. The result was confusion in a theater that demanded precision. AWACS crews, overwhelmed or uninformed, sometimes failed to track these helicopters entirely. These breakdowns weren't due to malice or neglect, but rather a creeping sense of complacency, a reliance on routine and assumption over rigorous verification. Units operated on different frequencies, different protocols, and, increasingly, different realities. In a system where timing, communication, and trust are life or death variables, the growing disconnect signaled more than inefficiency. It foreshadowed tragedy. The military's complex web of air coordination was slipping quietly toward a catastrophic failure. Takeoff. A mission in motion. April 14, 1994. At Incirlik Air Base in southern Turkey, the day begins like many others in the long, grinding pace of Operation Provide Comfort. An E-3 AWACS aircraft lifts off in the early morning, rising to its command post at 32,000 feet. From this airborne radar platform, a highly trained crew prepares to oversee all air traffic over northern Iraq, a critical responsibility in a region where US, coalition, and local forces share increasingly crowded skies. Not long after, 2 US Army UH-60 Black Hawk helicopters, part of the mission known as Eagle Flight, depart on a routine transport run. On board are American military personnel and foreign officials en route to diplomatic meetings in Iraq, part of the ongoing effort to stabilize the region after the Gulf War. To ensure they're unmistakably identified, the helicopters are adorned with oversized US flags, painted boldly on their fuselage, nose, and fuel tanks. The message is clear: these are friendly, protected aircraft. But recognition depends on more than markings. It requires coordination, vigilance, and attention from those watching the skies. And on that day, despite all precautions, no one was truly watching. Visibility only matters when someone is looking and seeing. Signals missed. The breakdown begins at 9:21 a.m. The lead Black Hawk calls in its position to the AWACS controllers. The crew aboard the high-flying radar plane acknowledges the transmission, tags the helicopters as friendly, and continues scanning. On the surface, it all seems routine. But beneath that calm lies a critical fracture. The helicopters are broadcasting the wrong IFF mode, an outdated signal not authorized for that airspace. No one corrects it. At the same time, they're on the wrong radio frequency and never switch to the designated tactical net. The safety net designed to shield them is already unraveling. The AWACS, meant to be their eyes and ears, no longer truly sees or hears them. When the helicopters briefly land in Zaku to pick up more passengers, their radar signatures drop off the screen. One crew member aboard AWACS notices the disappearance and flags it. a flicker of concern in an otherwise quiet cockpit. But the moment passes. No response. No follow-up. After a minute, the system auto-clears the alert. Just another glitch. Dismissed without action, the Black Hawks lift off again, unheard, untracked, and unprotected. In the crowded skies of northern Iraq, they are now flying blind. Friends in the sky. A fatal disconnect at around 10:00 a.m. Two F-15 Eagles roar into the sky from Incirlik Air Base, 100 miles from the Black Hawks' position. Captain Eric Wixon leads the combat air patrol, with Lieutenant Cole Randy May flying as his wingman. Their mission is clear and aggressive. Sweep the skies over northern Iraq for hostile aircraft, primarily remnants of Saddam Hussein's forces. Before takeoff, the pilots review the air tasking order, the daily flight schedule meant to coordinate all coalition aircraft. It includes a note about Black Hawk helicopter operations, but without the crucial details. No times, no coordinates, no flight paths. The information is incomplete, and in this environment, incomplete is dangerous. At 10:20 a.m., now inside Iraqi airspace, Wixon checks in with AWACS. Are there any known friendlies in the area? The response comes back. Calm, confident, no. But that's wrong. Dead wrong. Just miles ahead of them, two Black Hawks are moving through the same sky. The helicopters, silent on the wrong frequency and invisible on the radar, are flying straight into a zone where their protectors now see them as potential threats. Miscommunication has set the stage. The tragedy is already in motion. The mistake. Seconds to tragedy, moments after entering Iraqi airspace, Captain Wixon spots two radar blips, slow-moving contacts flying low. He radios AWACS again to confirm. Are there any known friendlies in the area? The reply, once more, no known aircraft. It's a decisive moment, and a disastrously incorrect answer. With no further direction from command, Wixon and May take matters into their own hands. Dropping altitude, they move in for a visual identification. It's a risky maneuver at fighter speed, over 520 miles per hour, and the window to assess is brutally short. In a brief flash, from about 1,000 feet away, Wixon glimpses the aircraft. To his eye, they resemble Soviet-made Mi-24 Hind helicopters, twin-engine gunships associated with Iraqi forces. The silhouette, the shape, the speed, it all fits in that fleeting instant. Tally 2 Hinds, he radios back, identifying them as enemy aircraft. There's silence on the net, no correction. No one challenges the call. No one mentions the possibility that these could be US Black Hawks. Despite earlier confirmations, despite their presence in the zone, the mistake is locked in. And now, with no one to stop it, the F-15s are preparing to strike their own. Two engaged. A catastrophe unfolds. By 10:28 a.m., the Black Hawks are back on AWACS radar. Their identification. Friend or foe, IFF signals, though delayed, are now clearly transmitting. Friendly, visible, flickering steadily across the screen for all to see. But the fatal silence continues. No one on the AWACS speaks up. No one calls out to correct the fighters. No one warns the helicopters. The opportunity to stop the unfolding tragedy is right there, on every screen. It passes in silence. We're engaged, Wixon radios, his voice steady. To his wingman, arm hot, without hesitation, he fires an AM-120 AMRAAM. It launches at over Mach 4, a blur of steel and smoke that covers the distance in seconds. Aboard the trailing Black Hawk, the passengers have no idea they've been misidentified. No chance to respond, evade, or defend. The missile hits. The aircraft erupts in a fireball, disintegrating mid-air. The lead Black Hawk dives instinctively, trying to escape, but it's too late. Lieutenant May, now locked on, fires a Sidewinder missile. It homes in on the heat signature and strikes. Within minutes, both helicopters fall from the sky. All 26 souls aboard, military personnel, diplomats, allies, are gone. killed not by enemies, but by their own side. Realization. From pride to horror circling. The wreckage below, the F-15 pilots believe they've completed a successful strike. Over the radio, a tone of grim satisfaction settles in. Stick a fork in them. They're done, one of them says. Confident, unshaken. But miles away, at the coordination center, a different picture begins to form. Kurdish villagers are reporting 2 helicopters down in the hills near the Turkish border. Initial assumptions point to an Iraqi attack, another hostile act in a dangerous region. Then, piece by piece, the truth begins to surface. The downed aircraft weren't Iraqi. They weren't enemy Hinds. They were American Black Hawks. The names of the passengers start coming in. Soldiers, diplomats, coalition officers, friends, allies, people known to those receiving the reports. In an instant, confidence turns to disbelief, pride to devastation. The unthinkable has happened. US fighter jets, acting on flawed information, have destroyed their own. The system meant to protect them, of radar, coordination, communication, failed at every level. The room goes silent. What began as routine ended in tragedy, not by enemy fire, but by friendly hands, in a sky clouded with error. Aftermath. The day after the tragedy, President Bill Clinton addressed the nation and the world. He made calls to foreign leaders, offering condolences and pledging answers. The Pentagon, under immense scrutiny, launched a full-scale investigation. What followed was a deluge of documents. Over 3,600 pages of transcripts, radar logs, and technical breakdowns, all aimed at uncovering how 2 US Army Black Hawk helicopters were shot down by US Air Force F-15s in northern Iraq. The final report revealed not a single point of failure, but a chain reaction of breakdowns, each preventable, each compounding the next. The F-15 pilots misidentified the helicopters as enemy aircraft. The helicopter's identification, friend or foe, IFF transponders were malfunctioning. The radios used by the Army didn't align with Air Force systems. Coordination between branches was lax. Communication between the AWACS crew and the F-15 pilots was unclear. Radar tags were misread or ignored. AWACS operators failed to raise questions, even as anomalies unfolded in real time. The system had grown reliant on habit and assumption. Perhaps the most chilling moment came during testimony, when an AWACS crew member was asked what action he took when the helicopter's radar tags disappeared. His answer was blunt. I did nothing. In that moment, amid a fog of bad data, missed signals and silence, a tragedy unfolded, not from malice, but from complacency. The price, 26 lives lost, and a stark reminder that in combat zones, routine can be as dangerous as the enemy. Justice and loss, a wound left. Open his answer, I did nothing. The words became a symbol, not just of one man's inaction, but of a system that failed at every level. In the aftermath, accountability became its own battleground. Colonel Randy May, who fired the second missile, was charged with negligent homicide. The charge was later dropped. Members of the AWACS crew faced courts-martial or administrative actions, but most ultimately walked free. Captain Eric Wixon, who led the strike and gave the fatal identifications, was never charged at all. He maintained he was certain of what he saw, despite his wingman admitting doubt. For the families of the 26 victims, the pain of loss was compounded by the failure of justice. They grieved not only for their loved ones, but for the silence that followed. The absence of real consequences felt like a second betrayal. Congress convened hearings. The Pentagon issued reports. Lessons were outlined in ink and buried in binders. Yet for many, it wasn't enough. There were names, but no accountability. A tragedy, but no reckoning. What remained was a scar, on policy, on trust, and on the belief that such a system could never turn on its own. The cost of silence operation. Provide Comfort flew on, tens of thousands of sorties until its end in 1996. But the shadow of April 14, 1994, never left the mountains of northern Iraq. The system worked, until it didn't. Everyone followed most of the rules. Everyone made small mistakes. But no one stopped to ask the hard questions. No one shouted the word that might have changed everything. Wait. In the end, 26 lives were lost. Not to enemy fire, but to a structure that chose routine over vigilance. A system built to protect them fell silent. At the one moment, it most needed to speak. Never forget that in a world built on systems, it's the human voice that still saves lives.